Story 1. Gerald Dwight Casey was born on January 15, 1955. He was a white male. He grew up in Texas, though the exact town is not recorded in public records. His family was not wealthy. Not much is known about his parents or whether he had siblings. From an early age, Gerald had trouble following rules. He went to school like other children, but he did not focus on his studies. Teachers may have noticed he was restless. He did not finish a college degree. By the time he was a young adult, he started committing small crimes. His first known legal problem happened in 1976. On March 29th of that year, he pleaded guilty to burglary of a building. Burglary means breaking into a building to steal things. The court did not send him to prison right away. Instead, the judge gave him 6 years of probation. Probation means he could stay out of prison if he followed certain rules. He had to stay away from crimes and report to an officer. But Gerald did not follow the rules. Later in 1976, he admitted to breaking his probation. He told the court he had done several illegal things. He said he possessed heroin, which is a strong and illegal drug. He said he possessed marijuana, another illegal drug. He admitted to another burglary of a building. He admitted to theft, which means taking something that did not belong to him. He also admitted to assault on a police officer. Assault means attacking or trying to hurt someone. On November 8, 1976, the judge revoked his probation. That meant Gerald had to go to prison. On that same day, he also pleaded guilty to burglary of a habitation. A habitation means a home where people live. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison for that crime. Gerald served time in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. After he got out, he did not stop breaking the law. On January 21, 1980, he again pleaded guilty to burglary of a habitation. This time the judge gave him 10 years in prison. He was sent back to the prison system. Even after serving that sentence, Gerald continued to use illegal drugs. On February 9, 1989, he pleaded guilty to misdemeanor possession of marijuana. Misdemeanor means a less serious crime, but still against the law. The judge gave him a sentence of 15 years. That was a long sentence for a small amount of marijuana. But the judge may have given that sentence because Gerald had so many past crimes. However, Gerald was not in prison at the time of this sentence. It is not clear from records if he served that time immediately or if it was suspended. What is clear is that by early 1989, Gerald was out of prison and living in Texas again. Gerald was 34 years old in 1989. He had spent many years of his adult life either on probation or in prison. He had a pattern of stealing and using drugs. He had also shown violence before, such as the assault on a police officer in 1976. He did not keep a steady job for long periods. Instead, he looked for easy ways to get money. He had a habit of planning thefts with other people. He also had a girlfriend or partner named Carla Smith. They were both trying to find money to move from Texas to Florida. Gerald had visited a man named Darrell Pennington several times before the summer of 1989. During those visits, Gerald saw that Darrell had a large collection of guns. Gerald looked at the guns and even fired some of them. He noticed that Darrell lived with a woman named Sonia Howell. Gerald did not have a legal way to earn the money he needed. He was already on probation or facing sentences for his past crimes. But none of that stopped him from thinking about new ways to get cash. Gerald Casey and his accomplice, Carla Smith, needed money. They wanted to move from Texas to Florida. They did not have enough cash, so they tried to sell some furniture and a television set. On July 7, 1989, they took these items to the home of Darrell Pennington. They asked Pennington to buy the furniture and the TV. Pennington said no. He did not want to buy them. That refusal made Casey and Smith think of another plan. They knew that Pennington owned many guns. They had seen the guns during earlier visits. Pennington kept the guns in the home he shared with his girlfriend, Sonia Howell. The gun collection was large. It included 1.22 caliber semi-automatic Ruger pistol, one 30.06 Browning rifle with a scope, one 300 Browning rifle with a scope, two semi-automatic assault rifles, one -91 Hong Kong dollars assault rifle, one 8,200 Browning double-barrel shotgun, and one Mossberry pump shotgun. This collection was valuable. Casey and Smith decided to steal the guns and sell them for cash. They made a detailed plan. Carla Smith explained the plan later at trial. First, they would wait until the morning of July 10th, 1989. Daryl Pennington went to work during the day. Sonia Howell stayed home alone. Smith would call Howell to make sure Pennington was not there. Then Smith and Casey would go to the home. They would subdue Howell. Subdue means to overpower her so she could not fight back. Then they would bind her with rope or something similar. Then they would gag her so she could not yell for help. After that, they would steal the guns. They decided they would take Howell to the woods and leave her there. They thought Pennington would believe that Howell had taken the guns herself. Finally, they would sell the guns, get cash, and flee to Florida. On the morning of July 10th, 1989, Pennington left for work. Casey and Smith put their plan into action. Smith called Howell. She asked if Pennington was home. Howell said he was not. Smith then told Howell that she and Casey were coming over to do some partying. Howell did not know that the real reason was robbery. Before going to the house, Casey and Smith stopped at a convenience store called Coleman's. Casey wrote down the phone number of the pay phone outside that store. Then Smith dropped Casey off at the Pennington and Howell home. After dropping him off, Smith drove back to Coleman's. She parked near the pay phone and waited. Her job was to wait for Casey to call her from the home. A short time passed. Then the pay phone rang. It was Casey. He told Smith to come pick him up. Smith drove to the home. She did not see Casey right away. She drove past once. Then she drove past a second time. This time she saw Casey coming out of a wooded area near the home. He was wearing a different shirt than before. He was carrying the shirt he had worn earlier. That shirt was covered in blood. Later, tests showed that blood belonged to Sonia Howell. Casey was also carrying several guns. He had 2 imitation Rolex watches. He had a gold nugget ring. He had a class ring and other jewelry. He also carried an Azarka water jug that was filled with loose change. All of these items had been taken from the Pennington and Howell home. Smith opened the car. Casey put the stolen items in the back seat. Then they drove away. Shortly after leaving, they stopped in an empty subdivision where no one lived. They moved the guns, the jewelry, and the bloody shirt from the back seat to the trunk of the car. They wanted to hide the evidence. They returned to their motel room. They took the water jug and started removing the loose change. They went to a bank to get coin wrappers. Then they went back to the motel room and began rolling the coins. They were trying to turn the change into usable money. After some time, they went to a local bar called Kehoe's. At the bar, Casey tried to sell the stolen guns. He asked employees and patrons if they wanted to buy weapons. He made several phone calls from the bar, also trying to find buyers. Later, Casey and Smith moved the guns again. They took them to a remote area called Williams Gully in Harris County. At that place, they also left the blood-stained shirt, a white towel that was soiled with blood, a green wash rag that was also soiled with blood, some unused rounds of ammunition, and a can of WD-40. They used the WD-40 to wipe fingerprints off the stolen weapons. They did not want police to find their prints. Later that evening on July 10th, 1989, Daryl Pennington returned home from work. He found Sonia Howell's body. He called the police. When officers arrived, they examined the scene. They determined that Howell had been hit on the head with a telephone receiver. She also had 10 wounds from 9 bullets. That meant 1 bullet went through her body and made 2 wounds, or 1 bullet hit and then another bullet hit nearby. In total, 9 bullets were fired into her body. She died from these injuries. On the evening of July 10th, 1989, Darrell Pennington came home from work. He walked into his home and found Sonia Howell. She was not moving. She had been badly hurt. Pennington called the police right away. Officers arrived and saw that Howell was dead. They also saw a telephone receiver lying nearby with blood on it. They counted many gunshot wounds on her body. The police knew this was a murder. The officers began to look for evidence. They collected hair samples from the victim's body. They also looked for anyone who might have seen something. The police learned that Casey and Smith had visited Pennington before. They also learned that Casey had a criminal record. The police started looking for Casey and Smith. When they searched the motel room where Casey and Smith had been staying, they found several stolen items. They found the gold nugget ring. They found the 2 imitation Rolex watches. They found rolled coins that matched the loose change stolen from the water jug. Darrell Pennington looked at these items and said they belonged to him. They had been taken from his home on July 10th. The police also searched the remote area called Williams Gully. There they found the bloodstained shirt, the white towel, the green wash rag, and the can of WD-40. A laboratory tested the blood on the shirt and the wash rag. The blood type matched Sonia Howell's blood type. The laboratory also tested the hair samples found on Howell's body. Those hair samples matched hair taken from Gerald Casey. Police talked to people in the area. A bartender named Daniel Ney worked at Kehoe's bar. He said that around 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. on July 10th, 1989, Casey came to the bar and tried to sell him guns. A man named Ricky Taylor said he bought a Ruger pistol from Casey in the parking lot of Kehoe's that afternoon. Another man named Robert Lindy Lane said he bought a -91 Hong Kong dollars assault rifle and 2 semi-automatic assault rifles from Casey shortly after July 10th. When Lane bought the guns, he saw several other guns and a Rolex watch that looked like the items stolen from Pennington. A man named Gomercindo Santana said he bought a .22 caliber Ruger pistol from Casey. The police recovered the guns sold to Taylor and Santana. Pennington identified them as part of his stolen collection. A ballistics expert examined the bullets that killed Sonia Howell. The expert said that at least 5 of the 9 bullets, and possibly all 9, were fired from the Ruger pistol that Santana bought from Casey. On July 26, 1989, a grand jury indicted Casey for capital murder. Capital murder means murder that happens during another serious crime, in this case robbery. Casey pleaded not guilty. His trial started in October 1991. Carla Smith testified against Casey. She told the jury about the plan to steal the guns. She said she dropped Casey off at the home and waited at the pay phone. She said Casey called her to pick him up. She said she saw him coming from the woods with a bloody shirt and with the stolen goods. Casey also testified. He told a different story. He said he and Smith were both with Howell. He said Smith and Howell got into an argument. He said he tried to stop the fight, but Smith hit Howell with a telephone and then shot her. The jury did not believe Casey. They had physical evidence linking Casey to the crime. They had his hair on the victim. They had witnesses who bought guns from him. They had his attempt to wipe fingerprints from the weapons. On October 28, 1991, the jury found Gerald Casey guilty of capital murder. Then came the punishment phase. The state showed that Casey had a long criminal history. The jury decided he should receive the death penalty. On November 12, 1991, the court officially sentenced Casey to death. Casey appealed his case. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence on June 22, 1994. He asked the United States Supreme Court to review his case. The Supreme Court denied his request on March 20, 1995. He filed more appeals in state and federal court over the next several years. All of them were denied. On March 8, 2000, a federal district court denied his request for habeas relief. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals also denied him. The Supreme Court again refused to hear his case. On April 18, 2002, Gerald Dwight Casey was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. He was 47 years old. He was asked if he wanted to make a final statement. He declined to say anything. He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. His final meal was fried chicken, coleslaw, tea or juice, vanilla ice cream, and a Dr. Pepper. Carla Elizabeth Smith received a 10-year prison sentence for theft for her role in Howell's murder. She was paroled in 1999. She had no criminal convictions after that. Darrell Pennington, the man who found Howell's body, died in 2001. Sonia Lynn Howell was 29 years old when she was killed, and her murderer was brought to justice 11 years later. Story 2. Alton Coleman was born on November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois. Waukegan is a small city about 30 minutes north of Chicago, near Lake Michigan. Alton was the middle child of 3 boys and 2 girls. His mother was very young when she had him. Police records later showed that she worked as a prostitute. She showed no interest in her new baby. According to family members, she did not want to keep him. So Alton was given to his grandmother, Alma Hosea, to raise. One relative later said that Alton's mother threw him away, just like you would throw away garbage. Alton grew up in a poor neighborhood on Market Street in Waukegan. His grandmother ran a brothel and a gambling house inside her home. As a young child, Alton was exposed to things that most children never see. There were prostitutes, customers, and gamblers coming and going at all hours. Family members later said that Alton was physically abused and sexually abused while living there. He also saw adults having sex with animals. He saw group sex. His mother and grandmother sometimes took part in these acts. His grandmother also practiced voodoo. She made young Alton kill small animals and cut out their body parts. She used these parts to make potions and spells. At school, Alton had problems. He often wet his pants during class. The other children made fun of him for this. They gave him a cruel nickname, Pissy. He did not have many friends. Teachers and neighbors noticed that Alton did not show much emotion. He kept to himself most of the time. He did not do well in his classes. Eventually, he dropped out of school after the 9th grade. He never finished his education. When he was old enough, Alton found a job working in the kitchen at a local veterans hospital. He worked there for some time, but he did not stay out of trouble. On the streets, people called him Big Al. He carried a knife with him wherever he went. He had a quick temper. He began running with local gangs. This made his behavior worse. He started getting arrested for small crimes. But soon, the crimes became more serious. Most of them were sexual in nature. In 1973, when Alton was 17 or 18 years old, he committed a very serious crime. He and another person kidnapped an elderly woman in Waukegan. They robbed her. Then Alton raped her. The woman survived, but she was too afraid to testify about the rape in court. Because she would not speak about the sexual assault, the prosecutors made a deal with Alton. He pleaded guilty to the robbery charge. He received a sentence of 2 to 6 years in prison. He was sent to Joliet State Prison. While Alton was serving time in Joliet, prison officials received reports that he was molesting other inmates. A psychiatrist examined him. The doctor wrote a report that described Alton as pansexual. That meant he was willing to have sex with any object, any woman, any man, or any child. He did not care who or what the partner was. The report also noted that Alton had an IQ on the lower edge of normal. He was not intellectually disabled, but he was below average. Alton was released from prison on parole. He did not stay out of trouble for long. He met a young teenage girl and married her. The marriage lasted only 6 months. His wife left him. Before she moved her belongings out of their home, She asked police to come and protect her. She later explained that she could no longer handle his interests. She said he was obsessed with bondage. He wanted violent sex. He was also interested in young girls. She was afraid of him. In the early 1980s, Alton was arrested for rape on 2 separate occasions. Both times, he went to trial. Both times, the jury believed that the victims had agreed to have sex with him. He was found not guilty of rape. However, he was convicted of lesser charges and served some additional time in prison. After his second acquittal, a prosecutor named Fred Foreman said something about Alton. He said Alton knew exactly what kind of evidence would hold up in court and what would not. He said Alton was a career criminal who had learned how to work the system. In the summer of 1983, Alton's own sister went to the police. She told them that Alton had tried to rape her 8-year-old daughter. That was Alton's own niece. The police arrested him. But 3 weeks later, the sister went back to court. She asked the judge to drop all the charges. She said it was all a misunderstanding. She said many families go through things like that. The judge was shocked by her change of story. He said he believed the woman was terrified of her brother. But without her cooperation, the judge had no choice. He dismissed the charges. Alton walked free. Soon after that case was dismissed, Alton was accused of another rape. This time, the victim was a 14-year-old girl in Waukegan. He held a knife to her throat and raped her. At the same time, police began to suspect that Alton was involved in the murder of a 15-year-old girl named Gina Frazier. She had been raped and killed. Alton was indicted for that crime. A judge set a bail amount that was not very high. Alton was able to pay it and get out of jail while he waited for his trial. Alton Coleman paid the bail and got out of jail. He knew he was facing serious charges, including murder. He decided he would not stay to face trial. He gathered some belongings and left Waukegan. Before he left, he met a young woman named Deborah Denise Brown. Deborah was 21 years old. She had dropped out of high school. She was a follower, not a leader. Alton charmed her. She agreed to go with him. Together, they fled the state. They went first to Gary, Indiana. They rented an apartment there in early June 1984. For about 2 weeks, they stayed inside and did not draw much attention. But on June 18, 1984, they went out looking for victims. On that day, 2 young girls were walking home from a candy store in Gary. One was 7-year-old Tamika Turks. The other was Tamika's 9-year-old aunt, Annie. Alton and Deborah approached the girls. They spoke to them in a friendly way. They convinced the children to go into the woods to play a game. The girls trusted them and followed. Once they were deep in the woods and out of sight, Alton and Deborah turned on the children. They removed Tamika's shirt. They tore the shirt into small strips of fabric. They used these strips to tie up both girls. They also put strips of fabric over their mouths to keep them quiet. Tamika became very scared and started to cry. Deborah held Tamika's nose and mouth closed so she could not breathe. While Deborah held the child down, Alton stomped on Tamika's chest with his feet. He jumped on her chest over and over. He broke her ribs. The broken ribs punctured her lungs and heart. Tamika stopped moving. Alton carried Tamika's body a short distance away and left her in the bushes. Then he returned to Annie. He forced Annie to perform oral sex on him. He also forced Annie to perform oral sex on Deborah. After that, Alton raped Annie. Then Alton and Deborah choked Annie until she lost consciousness. They thought she was dead. They left her body in the woods and walked away. But Annie was not dead. She had only passed out. Later, she woke up alone in the dark. She stumbled out of the woods and found help. A man saw her and called an ambulance. She was taken to a hospital. Doctors found that she had deep cuts. Her intestines were pushing into her vagina from the inside because of the injuries. She survived, but she would have permanent physical and mental damage. The next day, June 19, 1984, police searched the woods. They found Tamika's body hidden in the bushes. The cause of death was strangulation. A strip of elastic bedsheet had been tied around her neck. Later, police found the same type of fabric in the apartment where Alton and Deborah had been staying. On that same day, June 19th, police in Waukegan, Illinois found another body. It was the body of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat. She had disappeared weeks earlier. On May 29, 1984, before Alton fled Indiana, he had been in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He had befriended a woman named Juanita Wheat. He told her his name was Robert Knight. He showed her a fake identification card. He ate dinner with her family. He played with her 2 children, Vernita and her younger brother Brandon. On May 29th, Juanita allowed Vernita to go with Alton to his apartment to pick up a stereo system. Vernita never came back. Alton had taken her to Waukegan instead. On June 19th, her body was discovered in the bathroom of an abandoned building. Her hands and neck were bound with television cable wire. A fingerprint from Alton was found on the door of that bathroom. The cause of death was ligature strangulation. Also on June 19th, a 25-year-old woman named Donna Williams disappeared from Gary, Indiana. She had been seen with a nice couple who said they were from Boston. That couple was Alton and Deborah. Donna's car was stolen. A week later, her car was found abandoned in Detroit, Michigan. Inside the car, police found a fake identification card with Deborah Brown's picture on it. Donna's body was not found until July 11, 1984. It was discovered in an abandoned house near Wayne State University in Detroit. She had been strangled with a pair of pantyhose. On June 24, 1984, in Detroit, Alton and Deborah approached a woman. They held a knife to her and forced her to drive them to Ohio. The woman was smart. She drove the car and purposely crashed it into an oncoming truck. The crash caused damage, but she was able to jump out and run away. Alton and Deborah fled in the damaged car. The woman survived. On June 28, 1984, Alton and Deborah went to the home of an elderly couple in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. The husband was Palmer Jones, age 62. His wife Maggie was 50. Alton handcuffed Palmer. Then he beat both of them with a club. They took $86 from the house. They stole the couple's car and drove away. The Joneses survived the attack. On June 30, 1984, Alton and Deborah carjacked 2 men in Detroit. One of the men was disabled and could not walk well. They threw him out of the moving car. The other man they let go. Neither man was killed. On July 2, 1984, Alton and Deborah went to another couple's home in Detroit. They beat the couple with a pipe. While he beat them, Alton ranted about how black people were forcing him to kill other black people. He stole $100 from them and took their car. Then they drove to Toledo, Ohio. On July 5, 1984, in Toledo, Alton met a woman named Virginia Temple. She was 30 years old and had several children. Alton and Deborah spent the night at her home. Virginia had a 9-year-old daughter named Rochelle. The next day, relatives became worried because they could not reach Virginia. They went to her home. The young children were inside alone. They were frightened. The relatives searched the house and found Virginia and Rochelle hidden in a crawl space. Both had been strangled to death. A bracelet was missing from the home. That bracelet would later be found under the body of another victim in Cincinnati. On July 7, 1984, Alton and Deborah went to the home of Frank and Nancy Duvendak in Toledo. They handcuffed Frank. They cut phone cords and appliance cords and tied up both victims. They took money and the Duvendak's car. The Duvendaks survived. Also on July 7, 1984, Alton and Deborah appeared at the home of Reverend Millard Gay and his wife Catherine in Dayton, Ohio. The Gays were elderly. Alton was friendly and convincing. The Gays allowed the couple to stay in their home from July 7th to July 9th. On July 9th, the Gays drove Alton and Deborah to a religious service in Lockwood, Ohio. The next day, July 10th, the gays dropped Alton and Deborah off in downtown Cincinnati. On July 11, 1984, a 15-year-old girl named Tunny Story left her home in Cincinnati. She was going to a computer class at her junior high school. She was wearing rusty brown cut-off shorts, a beige sleeveless blouse, blue shoes, and a Michael Jackson button. A teacher saw her at school around 11:45 a.m. Later that day, between 5 o'clock and 6 p.m., a classmate saw Tunny standing on a street corner in Cincinnati. She was with a man and a woman. The classmate later identified the man as Alton Coleman. Tunny did not come home that night. Her mother called the police and reported her missing. On July 13, 1984, Alton and Deborah rode bicycles into Norwood, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati. It was about 9:30 in the morning. They saw a camping trailer in front of a house on Floral Avenue. A sign on the trailer said it was for sale. The owners of the trailer were Harry Walters and his wife Marlene. Harry was 45 years old. Marlene was 44. She was a Sunday school teacher and a librarian at her church. Alton and Deborah knocked on the door. They asked about the camper. Harry and Marlene found the couple to be polite and friendly. They invited Alton and Deborah inside to discuss the sale. Harry sat on the couch and talked about the title to the trailer. Alton picked up a heavy wooden candlestick from the room. He looked at it and said he admired it. Then, without warning, he hit Harry on the back of the head with the candlestick. The blow was so hard that the candlestick broke. A piece of Harry's skull was driven into his brain. Harry lost consciousness and fell to the floor. Alton then attacked Marlene. He hit her over and over again. He used the broken candlestick. He used a glass soda bottle. He used a magazine rack. He hit her 20 to 25 times in total. He also used a pair of vice grips to rake across her face and scalp. He smashed the back of her skull into pieces. Parts of her skull and brain were missing. After Marlene was dead, Alton tied her hands behind her back. He put a rope around her neck. He tied electrical cords around her bare feet. He covered her head with a bloody sheet. Harry was still alive but unconscious. Alton handcuffed Harry's hands behind his back. He put a rope around Harry's neck and stabbed him in the stomach. Then Alton and Deborah stole money, jewelry, shoes, and the Walters' red Plymouth car. They left the two bicycles behind. They drove away. At about 3:45 that afternoon, the Walters' daughter Sherry came home from work. She went to the basement. At the bottom of the stairs, she found her father barely alive and her mother dead. Sherry called for help. Harry survived, but he had severe brain damage. He did not see his wife's funeral. He needed multiple surgeries over the next 2 years. On July 15, 1984, the stolen Walters car was found abandoned in a cornfield near Lexington, Kentucky. On July 16, 1984, Alton and Deborah were in Lexington. They saw a 45-year-old college professor named Oline Carmichael walking to his car. They kidnapped him. They forced him into his own car and drove to Dayton, Ohio. There, they locked him in the trunk of the car and left him. A passerby heard noises coming from the trunk and called for help. Oline was found unharmed. Later on July 16, 1984, Alton and Deborah went back to the home of Reverend Millard Gay in Dayton. Reverend Gay recognized them. They pulled out guns. Reverend Gay asked Alton why he was doing this. According to Reverend Gay, Alton answered, "We generally kills them where we go." Alton beat Reverend Gay and his wife. He took their car and drove away. The Gays survived. Also on July 16th, in Indianapolis, Indiana, a 77-year-old man named Eugene Scott disappeared. His car was also gone. Later, his body was found in a ditch near Zionsville, Indiana. His hands had been slashed with a knife. He had been shot 4 times in the head with a .38 caliber handgun. On July 17, 1984, Alton and Deborah again appeared at the Gay home in Dayton. They took another car. Police believed that Eugene Scott was Alton's last murder victim, because his car was later found in Evanston, Illinois, where Alton and Deborah were eventually caught. On July 19, 1984, a real estate agent was looking at an abandoned building on May Street in Cincinnati. Inside the building, the agent found a body. It was badly decomposed. The body was identified as Tunny Story. A Michael Jackson button and a pair of brown shorts with keys in the pocket were found nearby. The keys fit the lock of the Story family home. The cause of Tunny's death was strangulation. Written on a wall above her body, someone had scratched the words, "I hate niggers." Death, and outlined the words in lipstick. By this time, Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown had committed at least 8 murders, 7 rapes, 3 kidnappings, and 14 armed robberies across 6 states. The murders included 9-year-old Vernita Wheat in Illinois, 7-year-old Tamika Turks in Indiana, 25-year-old Donna Williams in Michigan, 30-year-old Virginia Temple and her 9-year-old daughter Rochelle in Ohio, 15-year-old Tunny Story in Ohio, 44-year-old Marlene Walters in Ohio, and 77-year-old Eugene Scott in Indiana. There were also surviving victims who had been beaten, raped, robbed, and left for dead. Alton and Deborah were still free. While Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown were still moving from state to state, police in multiple jurisdictions were already looking for them. The first missing person reports came from Kenosha, Wisconsin, when Juanita Wheat reported her daughter Vernita missing on May 29, 1984. Kenosha police took the report. They soon learned that a man named Robert Knight had been seen with Vernita. Police showed Juanita a photo lineup. She identified Alton Coleman as the man who called himself Robert Knight. Officers then went to Waukegan, Illinois, to find Coleman. But he had already left town. His family members told police they did not know where he had gone. In early June, police in Gary, Indiana received a report about 2 missing girls. On June 18th, Tamika Turks and her Aunt Annie did not come home. The next day, Annie was found alive in the woods. She was taken to the hospital. Doctors treated her injuries. Police interviewed her at the hospital. She described a man and a woman who had attacked her and killed Tamika. She gave descriptions of both suspects. Later that same day, searchers found Tamika's body. The coroner confirmed she had been strangled. Police in Gary also learned that a 25-year-old woman named Donna Williams had gone missing on June 19th. Her car was found a week later in Detroit. Inside the car was a fake ID with Deborah Brown's picture. Gary police shared this information with Detroit police. Detectives in Detroit began looking for a man and a woman traveling together. On June 24th, a woman in Detroit survived a kidnapping attempt by a couple matching the descriptions. She told police that the couple had forced her to drive toward Ohio. She gave details about their appearance and clothing. On June 28th, an elderly couple in Dearborn Heights, Michigan was beaten and robbed. The husband, Palmer Jones, told police that a black man and a black woman had attacked them. He described the man as smooth-talking and polite before the violence started. The couple's stolen car was later found abandoned. Police lifted fingerprints from the car. Those prints were sent to the FBI database. On July 2nd, another couple in Detroit was attacked in their home. The victims described the same man and woman. The man had ranted about black people forcing him to kill blacks. This detail was unusual. Police in Detroit, Gary, and now Toledo, Ohio began sharing notes. They realized that a violent pair was moving across the Midwest, committing new crimes every few days. On July 5th, Virginia Temple and her daughter Rochelle were killed in Toledo. Their bodies were discovered by relatives on July 6th. Toledo police processed the scene. They found evidence linking the murders to a man and a woman who had stayed in the home. Neighbors described the visitors. Toledo police put out a regional alert. On July 7th, Frank and Nancy Duvendak were bound and robbed in Toledo. They survived and gave detailed descriptions of their attackers. They also noted that the male suspect had handcuffed them. Toledo police added these details to the growing case file. On July 11th, Tunney's Story disappeared in Cincinnati. Her mother reported her missing that evening. Cincinnati police took the report and began searching. They did not find her body until July 19th. By then, the body was partially decomposed. Investigators collected fingerprints and other evidence from the abandoned building where Tunney was found. A fingerprint lifted from the scene was matched to Alton Coleman, who had fingerprints on file from his previous arrests in Illinois. On July 13th, Marlene Walters was killed and her husband Harry was severely beaten in Norwood, Ohio. Sherry Walters called 911. At about 3:45 p.m. Norwood police arrived at the house. They saw the blood, the bound victims, and the missing car. Harry Walters was rushed to the hospital. When he regained consciousness, he told police that a young black man and a black woman had come to buy his camper. He described the man as very polite at first. He said the man hit him with a candlestick. He did not remember anything after that. Norwood police issued a bulletin for the stolen red Plymouth Reliant. On July 15th, the stolen Walters car was found abandoned in a cornfield near Lexington, Kentucky. Kentucky police notified Ohio authorities. Investigators went to Lexington and searched the area. They did not find Coleman or Brown, but they confirmed that the couple had passed through Kentucky. On July 16th, Oline Carmichael was kidnapped in Lexington. He was found locked in his own car trunk in Dayton, Ohio, later that same day. He told police that a man and a woman had taken him. He described them. Dayton police realized these were the same suspects wanted in multiple states. Later that day, Reverend Millard Gay and his wife were attacked in their Dayton home. Reverend Gay survived and told police that the attackers were the same couple who had stayed with him days earlier. He said the man had threatened to kill them. Dayton police put out a statewide alert in Ohio. On July 17th, Eugene Scott disappeared in Indianapolis. His body was found soon after. Indiana police added his murder to the growing list of crimes linked to the couple. They also found that his car had been driven toward Illinois. By the middle of July 1984, the FBI was fully involved. The Bureau had been tracking the crime spree since the murders of the two girls in Gary. On July 12, 1984, Alton Coleman was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list as a special edition. He joined a short list of the most dangerous fugitives in the country. The FBI distributed his photograph and Deborah Brown's photograph to police departments across the Midwest. They warned the public that the couple was armed and extremely violent. Police in Evanston, Illinois, a city just north of Chicago, began watching locations where Coleman had known friends and associates. Coleman had grown up in nearby Waukegan. He had family and acquaintances in the Evanston area. Detectives believed that he might eventually return to familiar ground. On July 19, 1984, the body of Tunney Story was found in Cincinnati. The fingerprint match to Alton Coleman was confirmed by the FBI. The murder count now included Ohio. The manhunt intensified. On July 20, 1984, shortly before noon, an acquaintance of Alton Coleman saw the couple sitting on bleachers at Mason Park in Evanston, Illinois. They were watching a pickup basketball game. The acquaintance called the police. Officers from Evanston, along with FBI agents and state police, surrounded the park. They approached carefully because they knew Coleman was dangerous. Coleman saw the officers coming. He stood up and began walking away. He was wearing a torn yellow shirt and had a short haircut, unlike the curly style in his wanted photos. Officers confronted him. Coleman said, "You got the wrong man." He gave two fake names. Deborah Brown told officers her name was Denise Johnson. Officers searched them. They found a loaded revolver on Deborah. They found a long knife hidden in Alton's boot. Neither of them reached for their weapons. They surrendered peacefully. The arrest took only minutes. The officers took Alton and Deborah to the Evanston police station. FBI agents matched their fingerprints to prints found at crime scenes in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and Kentucky. The fingerprints proved conclusively that they were the suspects. Alton Coleman was held on a bond of $25 million cash. After the arrest, police separated Alton and Deborah. Deborah was advised of her constitutional rights. She said she wanted to remain silent and speak to an attorney. However, during transport to a federal lockup in Chicago, she began talking to the agents. She asked questions like, "Where am I going? And what am I charged with?" Later, at the federal building, she was again advised of her rights. She refused to sign a waiver, but she agreed to talk as long as she could stop whenever she wanted. Over the next 2.5 hours, Deborah discussed the crime spree in detail. She confessed to many of the crimes. After she finished, she asked again for an attorney. Her confession was later used in court over the objection of her lawyers. Alton Coleman did not confess. He denied knowing or killing any of the victims. He claimed that Deborah had committed the murders, including the killing of Marlene Walters. Because the crimes spanned multiple states, prosecutors had to decide where to try the couple first. Michigan and Wisconsin did not have the death penalty. Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois did. Prosecutors chose to try the strongest cases in the states where the death penalty was available. Ohio was given the first opportunity because the evidence in the Walters murder was very strong, including a surviving victim who could testify. Alton Coleman was tried separately from Deborah Brown. The first trial was in Hamilton County, Ohio, for the murder of Marlene Walters. The trial began in April 1985. Harry Walters, now recovered enough to speak, testified in court. He identified Coleman as the man who hit him with the candlestick. The prosecution presented fingerprint evidence, blood evidence, and testimony from police investigators. The jury also heard about the other crimes to show a pattern of conduct. On May 6, 1985, the jury found Alton Coleman guilty of aggravated murder. In the penalty phase, the jury recommended the death penalty. The trial judge accepted the recommendation and sentenced Coleman to death. Later in 1985, Coleman was tried for the murder of Tunny Story in Cincinnati. The classmate who saw Tunny with Coleman on the corner of May and Morgan Streets testified. The fingerprint from the abandoned building was presented as evidence. The jury found Coleman guilty of aggravated murder. They again recommended the death penalty. On June 24, 1985, the trial judge sentenced Coleman to death for the Story murder as well. Coleman was then extradited to Indiana. He was tried for the murder of 7-year-old Tamika Turks. The surviving victim, Annie, testified about what Coleman and Brown had done to her and her niece. The jury convicted Coleman. He received another death sentence from Indiana. He was then extradited to Illinois. He was tried for the murder of 9-year-old Vernita Wheat. The fingerprint on the bathroom door and witness testimony placed him at the scene. The Illinois jury convicted him and sentenced him to death. At the sentencing, Coleman told the jurors, "I'm a dead man. I'm dead already. You are talking to a dead man, not a live man." Deborah Brown was tried separately. She was convicted in Ohio for the murders of Marlene Walters and Tunny Story. She received death sentences for both. She was also convicted in Indiana for the murder of Tamika Turks and received a death sentence there. However, on January 10, 1991, Ohio Governor Richard Celeste commuted Deborah Brown's death sentence to life in prison. Governor Celeste said that Brown was mentally retarded, had childlike emotional development, and had a master-slave relationship with Coleman. She remains in the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, serving life sentences. Indiana still has a death sentence against her, but as of the time of Coleman's execution, Indiana had not requested extradition. Alton Coleman appealed his convictions and death sentences for many years. His lawyers argued that he had received ineffective legal counsel. They also argued that prosecutors had improperly removed black jurors from his trial. In 2001, a federal appeals court threw out Coleman's death sentence for the murder of Tunney Story. The court said his attorneys had not represented him well in that case. However, the same court upheld his death sentence for the murder of Marlene Walters. Coleman's lawyers asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review the Walters ruling. The Supreme Court declined to hear the appeal. On April 26, 2002, Alton Coleman was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. His final meal was filet mignon with mushroom gravy, biscuits and gravy, fried chicken, French fries, broccoli with cheese, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, a salad, sweet potato pie, butter pecan ice cream, and cherry cola. He ate part of the meal the night before. He ate one piece of toast on the morning of his execution. His final words were, "The Lord is my shepherd," which he repeated over and over until the drugs took effect. He was pronounced dead at 10:13 a.m. Harry Walters, the husband who survived the attack, watched the execution from behind a death chamber window. Juanita Wheat, the mother of Vernita Wheat, watched on a closed-circuit television from another room. Harry Walters had said before the execution, "Execution is the solution." Alton Coleman was the only person in the United States at that time who had active death sentences from 3 different states. After his execution, the death sentences from Indiana and Illinois became moot. Deborah Brown remains in prison in Ohio. The surviving victims, including Annie, have carried lifelong scars. Some victims' families never received full closure because some of the murders were never tried in court. The case was closed, but the pain for those affected continued long after Coleman was put to death. Story 3. Rodolfo Baiza Hernandez was born on November 18, 1949. He was born in the United States. His family lived in San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio is a large city in the southern part of the state. Hernandez was of Mexican descent. He grew up in a Hispanic community. His family was not wealthy. He lived with his parents and his sister. His sister's name was Susan. Later in life, Susan would marry a man named Jesse Garibay. But when Hernandez was a child, he lived a normal life for that time and place. He went to school in San Antonio. He did not finish a college degree. He learned to work with his hands. As a young man, Hernandez joined the United States Army. He served in the military for some time. While in the Army, he had medical and psychiatric records. These records would become important many years later. But at the time, he simply served and then left the Army. After the military, he returned to San Antonio. He found work as an auto mechanic. He fixed cars for a living. He continued this job for several years. Hernandez had friends in San Antonio. He also had some problems with the law when he was young. In 1971, he was convicted for unauthorized use of a vehicle. That means he took a car that did not belong to him. He received 2 years of probation for that crime. Probation means he was allowed to stay out of prison as long as he followed the rules. But Hernandez did not stop breaking the law. In 1974, he committed a more serious crime. He was convicted on 2 counts of aggravated robbery. Aggravated robbery means stealing from someone while using a weapon or threatening to hurt them. For these crimes, he was sent to prison. He began serving a sentence of 15 years, though some records say 12 years. He went into the Texas Department of Corrections. While in prison, Hernandez behaved well enough to be released early. In 1979, he was granted parole. Parole means he was allowed to leave prison before his full sentence was finished. But he still had to follow rules. One of the rules was that he could not illegally possess guns. For a few years after his parole, Hernandez tried to live normally. He had a parole officer named Mary Van Sickle. She watched over him from 1982 to 1983. During that time, Hernandez broke the rules. In 1983, the police found that he had 2 handguns in his possession. One was a .25 caliber handgun. The other was a .38 caliber handgun with ammunition. He was not supposed to have any guns because he was a convicted felon on parole. Because he had these guns, his parole was revoked. That means he was sent back to prison. He returned to the Texas Department of Corrections. He served more time. Eventually, he was released again. The exact date of his second release is not clearly recorded, but court records show that he was discharged from prison for the second time about 13 months after he was sent back. That would place his release around late 1984 or early 1985. After getting out of prison the second time, Hernandez went back to San Antonio. He was now in his mid-30s. He had a criminal record that included robbery and illegal gun possession. He had spent years in prison. He had a sister named Susan, and she was married to a young man named Jesse Garibay. Hernandez spent time with them. He did not have a steady job at this point. He was living day to day in the same neighborhoods he had grown up in. In early March of 1985, Hernandez was 35 years old. He had been out of prison for only a few months. He was walking around San Antonio when he saw a group of young men who had just arrived from Mexico. Those men were looking for work. Hernandez spoke to them. He asked them what they were doing. That conversation would lead to the events that followed. The 5 young men had just arrived from Mexico. They had traveled inside a boxcar on a train. They crossed into the United States illegally. When they got to San Antonio, they wanted to go to Denton, Texas. Denton is north of San Antonio. They heard there was farm or ranch work there. They did not know anyone in San Antonio. They did not have a car. They needed a ride. Hernandez spoke to them on the street. He learned where they wanted to go. He told them he could help. He took the 5 men to his house. He told them to wait outside. Then he went inside the house. It was early in the morning. His brother-in-law, Jesse Garibay, was asleep inside. Hernandez woke Garibay up. Hernandez said they could drive the 5 men to Denton for a fee. The men would pay them for the ride. Garibay agreed to help. Hernandez also woke up his brother Richard. Richard got into the car as well. The car was a family car. Garibay drove the car. Hernandez sat in the passenger seat. Richard sat between them in the front seat. The 5 men sat in the back seat. The group drove away from the house. They did not drive straight to Denton. First, they dropped Richard off at his job. Richard got out of the car and went to work. Now there were 7 people in the car, Garibay driving, Hernandez next to him, and the 5 men in the back. They continued driving north. They entered Comal County. Comal County is between San Antonio and New Braunfels. Garibay and Hernandez chose a remote area. It was away from the main highway. It was a secluded spot. No other cars were around. No houses were nearby. Then Garibay stopped the car. He and Hernandez pretended the car was having mechanical trouble. This was a lie. The car was working fine. One of the 2 men opened the trunk of the car. Inside the trunk, there were several firearms. They took the guns out. Then Garibay and Hernandez turned to face the 5 men. They pointed the guns at them. They ordered the men to get out of the car. The 5 men were scared. They did not have weapons. They got out of the car. One of the men tried to run away. He ran across the ground to escape. Hernandez raised his gun and shot him in the back. The bullet hit the man. He fell down. He was hurt but still alive. Hernandez then gave an order. He told all 5 men to lie down on the ground. He told them to lie face up. That means looking at the sky. He told them to hand over all their money. The men were lying on the ground. They could not fight back. They took out whatever money they had. Hernandez walked from one man to the next. He took their money from them. Then, after taking the money, he shot each man in the neck. He did this one by one. He used a handgun. Jesse Garibay also had a gun. Garibay shot at the men as well. The weapons used were a .22 caliber gun and a .25 caliber gun. The bullets came from both types of firearms. After shooting each man in the neck, Hernandez and Garibay stopped. They took whatever valuables the men had. Then they got back into the car. They left the 5 men lying on the ground. The men were bleeding from their wounds. Hernandez and Garibay drove away fast. They returned to San Antonio. They went back to their homes. One of the 5 men was named Victor Manuel Serrano Servan. He was 20 years old. He was from Mexico. He had come to the United States to find work. On the ground that day, he had been shot 4 times. His wounds were too severe. He died from his injuries. Paramedics or hospital staff later pronounced him dead on arrival at a local hospital. The other 4 men survived. They had been shot in the neck, but were not killed. They lay on the ground bleeding. Eventually they got help. They were taken to a hospital. They recovered from their wounds. Later, 2 of these survivors would tell what happened. After Hernandez and Garibay got home, Susan Garibay saw them. Susan was Hernandez's sister and Garibay's wife. She noticed her husband was acting strange. Jesse Garibay was covering himself with blankets. He looked scared. He was shaking. Meanwhile, Hernandez sat watching television. He had a gun. He was swinging it on his little finger. He acted like nothing serious had happened. Later that night, a news report came on television. The report was about the shootings in Comal County. It said 5 men had been shot. 1 man had died. Hernandez watched the news. He looked at his sister. He told her that he was a gunslinger. He said President Reagan had told him that Texas was overpopulated. He said the president instructed him to get rid of some illegal aliens in San Antonio. He was laughing and joking when he said these words. Susan did not think he was serious. She thought he was just making jokes. A few days later, Hernandez and Garibay went to stay at a neighbor's house. The neighbor's name was Anthony Urbano. While they were there, another news report came on television. It was about the same shootings near New Braunfels. Hernandez was again holding 2 small guns. He was swinging them on his fingers. He bragged to Anthony Urbano. He said he was the one who shot those men. He said he killed one of them. Soon after that, Hernandez took 2 guns to a friend. He asked the friend to sell the guns for him. He wanted to get rid of the evidence. The friend took the guns. The friend later tried to sell them. But the police would eventually recover those guns. Firearms experts would later examine the guns. They would match the bullets found in the 5 victims to those 2 pistols. The police did not arrest Hernandez immediately, but people around him had heard his boasts. Susan Garibay had heard him. Anthony Urbano had heard him. Those statements would later be reported. For now, Hernandez continued living in San Antonio. He did not know that the police were beginning to look for him. The police learned about the shootings from the survivors. The 4 men who did not die went to the hospital. While they were being treated, they told the police what happened. They described the 2 shooters. They gave details about the car and the location. The police wrote down their statements. The police also found the guns. Hernandez had given the 2 guns to a friend to sell. That friend did not sell them quickly. The police traced the guns back to Hernandez. Firearms experts tested the guns. They confirmed that the bullets taken from the 5 victims came from those 2 pistols. This was physical evidence linking Hernandez to the crime. Hernandez was arrested 6 days after the shootings. He was found near Poteet, Texas. Poteet is a small town south of San Antonio. The police took him into custody. Jesse Garibay was arrested 12 days after the murders. He was caught in Longview, Texas. Longview is far from San Antonio, near the Louisiana state line. Both men were charged. On May 15, 1985, a grand jury indicted Hernandez for capital murder. The charge was murder committed during a robbery. That made it eligible for the death penalty. The trial began in September 1985. A jury was selected to hear the case. During the trial, the prosecution called witnesses. Two of the survivors testified. They pointed to Hernandez in the courtroom. They said he was the man who shot them in the neck. Susan Garibay, Hernandez's sister, testified. She told the jury what Hernandez said about President Reagan and being a gunslinger. Anthony Urbano, the neighbor, testified. He told the jury that Hernandez bragged about shooting the men and killing one. The firearms expert testified about the guns and the bullets. The prosecution also presented Hernandez's criminal history. Texas Rangers Bob Steele and Al Cuellar testified that Hernandez was not a peaceful citizen. The jury learned about his 1974 aggravated robbery convictions. They learned that he had been on parole and had it revoked for having guns. His former parole officer, Mary Van Sickle, testified about the 1983 parole violation. Hernandez's lawyers tried to defend him, but the evidence was strong. On September 25, 1985, the jury found Hernandez guilty of capital murder. The next day, September 26, 1985, the same jury heard more evidence to decide the punishment. Dr. John Sparks, a psychiatrist, testified about Hernandez's future dangerousness. The jury decided on the death penalty. Hernandez was sentenced to death. Jesse Garibay was tried separately. He was convicted of theft. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Later, after his release, Garibay received 4 more convictions for burglary and theft. Hernandez appealed his case. On October 24, 1990, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed his conviction and sentence. He asked for rehearing, but it was denied on December 5, 1990. He then appealed to the United States Supreme Court. On June 3, 1991, the Supreme Court denied his petition. Hernandez then filed a state habeas corpus petition on August 15, 1991. Habeas corpus is a legal way to challenge imprisonment. A special master reviewed the case. On October 7, 1993, the master proposed findings. The trial court denied relief on October 27, 1993. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied relief on June 28, 1994. Hernandez kept filing petitions, but all were denied. An execution date was set for February 22, 1996. But on February 7, 1996, a court granted a stay. This gave Hernandez time to file a federal habeas petition. He filed it on April 11, 1997. The Federal District Court denied relief on August 12, 1998. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed that denial on April 11, 2001. The Supreme Court denied certiorari on November 26, 2001. A new execution date was set for March 21, 2002. While on death row, Hernandez developed health problems. He had diabetes. The diabetes caused complications. In July 2001, his left leg was amputated 4 inches below the knee. He used a wheelchair. Before his March 2002 execution date, he asked for a prosthetic leg. He said he wanted to walk to his execution like a man. Prison officials said an infection prevented the wound from healing. They also said a prosthetic would cost $8,000 and was not a medical necessity. He was not given the artificial leg. On March 19, 2002, 2 days before his scheduled execution, Hernandez spoke with a priest. Then he asked to speak to San Antonio police. He said he had information about other murders. Detectives Robert Moffett and Barney Whitson drove 200 miles to death row in Livingston, Texas. They spoke with Hernandez. At first, they got little useful information. They left and started driving back. But prison officials called them. Hernandez wanted them to return. He promised to be more cooperative. That evening, Hernandez gave details about at least 12 other murders. He said he committed or witnessed them between 1980 in 1985. Most were unsolved. He named cases. He described crime scene details that only the killer would know. The detectives returned to San Antonio. Police worked through the night to match his stories to cold cases. By noon the next day, they had confirmed that Hernandez knew information that had never been made public. At 5:15 p.m. on March 21, 2002, just 45 minutes before Hernandez was to be executed, San Antonio police faxed Governor Rick Perry. They asked for an emergency stay of execution. At 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the scheduled execution, a guard told Hernandez that the governor had granted a 30-day reprieve. Hernandez was not executed that night. During the reprieve, police interviewed Hernandez again. He claimed he was a contract killer for mobsters from California, New York, and Chicago. He said he was paid between $20,000 and $20,000 and $100,000 per killing. He said he was promised immunity. Police linked him to 3 additional murders. One was Robert Comparin, a businessman shot in March 1983. Another was Ana Solis, a businesswoman from Mexico shot on August 12, 1982. The third murder was not fully described to protect the family's privacy. Police formed a 6-person task force to investigate his claims. They said he never showed remorse. Prosecutors requested a new execution date. A judge set it for April 30, 2002. This time, no further stays were granted. Hernandez did not eat his final meal of 2 double-meat cheeseburgers, French fries, 3 beef skirt tacos, guacamole salad, salt, and 2 fried chicken breasts. He was too nervous. On April 30, 2002, Hernandez was transported to the execution chamber in a wheelchair. He was strapped to a gurney. He asked the warden why he was strapped down, saying that straps were for people who wanted to escape. Then he gave his final words. "Everybody will be all right because y'all are going where I am going. Remember what I said. I want to see you all where I'm going. God, come and do your will. I'm ready, warden." As the lethal injection flowed, he repeated, "Here I am, God. I'm coming to do your will 3 times. His voice weakened each time. He was pronounced dead at 6:23 p.m. He was the 266th person executed in Texas since 1976. The 4 surviving victims continued their lives, and the family of Victor Manuel Serrano Servin finally saw the man who killed their son brought to justice. Story 4. Richard Charles Johnson was born on February 18, 1963. He was born in the United States. His family lived in Morehead City, North Carolina. Morehead City is a small town near the ocean. Richard had a mother named Nelda Johnson. He had a father too, but the records do not say much about his father. Richard grew up with his siblings. He had one sister named Lori Crawford. He had 2 brothers named Craig and John. The family did not have a lot of money. They were working-class people. His mother worked as a home health care giver. She took care of sick people in their homes. When Richard was a child, he went to school like other children. He did not do very well in school. He did not go to college. As he got older, he started to drink alcohol. He drank heavily. He also started to use drugs. His drinking and drug use became a bad habit. He would drink so much that sometimes he could not remember what he did. These were called memory blackouts. Richard had no criminal record when he was young. He had never been arrested for a serious crime before, but he had trouble keeping a job. He did not have a stable life. He moved around. He did not have a permanent home. He started to hitchhike. Hitchhiking means standing on the side of the road and asking drivers for a ride. Richard did this often because he did not have his own car. His family still loved him. His mother worried about him. His sister and brothers tried to stay in touch, but Richard kept drinking. He kept using drugs. He could not stop. His life was going nowhere. He spent many days on the road, going from place to place. He did not have a plan. He just went where the rides took him. By September 1985, Richard was 22 years old. He was still hitchhiking. He was still drinking. He was on a highway in North Carolina. He had his thumb out, hoping for a ride. That was how he lived. One day at a time. One ride at a time. In September 1985, a man named Dan Swanson was driving his recreational vehicle through North Carolina. He was on his way to Florida. Dan Swanson was from Fairfax, Virginia. He was a businessman. He had a history of mental illness and had received psychiatric treatment. On the road, he saw Richard Johnson hitchhiking. Dan stopped and picked Richard up. Richard got into the RV. That was the first step. The next day, Dan and Richard were driving on Interstate 95. This highway goes through North Carolina and South Carolina. They saw two more hitchhikers on the side of the road. One was a man named Curtis Harbert. The other was a woman named Connie Sue Hess. She also used the fake name Julie Smith. Dan stopped the RV. He picked them up too. Now there were 4 people inside the RV: Dan, Richard, Curtis, and Connie. They drove south. They made stops in Florence County and Clarendon County in South Carolina. At some point, Curtis and Connie had sex with Dan in the back of the RV. After that, Connie moved to the front to talk with Richard, who was driving. Curtis stayed in the back with Dan. While Dan was asleep in the back, someone shot him. The gun used was a .357 caliber handgun. The person who fired the shot was Richard Johnson. He shot Dan Swanson and killed him. After the shooting, Richard and Curtis wrapped Dan's body in blankets and sheets. They tied the wrapped body with wire. Then they hid the body under a mattress in the back of the RV. They did this so no one would see the corpse. Richard kept driving the RV. Curtis and Connie stayed inside. Richard had been drinking liquor. He was very drunk. He was also high on drugs. His driving became dangerous. He swerved from side to side. He hit guardrails along the highway. Other drivers on the road saw him driving badly. One of those drivers was a truck driver. The truck driver decided to call the police. He told the police about the RV driving erratically on Interstate 95 in Jasper County, South Carolina. A South Carolina state trooper named Bruce Kenneth Smalls received the report. Trooper Smalls was 30 years old. He was black. He was a highway patrol officer. His job was to stop dangerous drivers and keep the road safe. He found the RV on the highway. He turned on his lights and signaled for the RV to pull over. Richard stopped the RV on the side of the road. Trooper Smalls got out of his patrol car. He walked toward the RV. He went up to the door of the vehicle. Richard opened the door. Trooper Smalls asked questions. He stood on the steps of the RV, about to enter or talk to the driver. While Trooper Smalls was on the steps, Richard Johnson shot him. He shot the trooper 6 times. The shots killed Trooper Smalls instantly. The trooper's body fell. It was propped against the door of the RV. Then the body fell onto the side of the road. After shooting the trooper, Richard, Curtis, and Connie all ran away from the scene. They ran in different directions. Curtis and Connie ran together. Richard ran alone. They left the RV on the side of the road. They left the body of Trooper Smalls there. And hidden under the mattress in the back of the RV was the body of Dan Swanson. After Richard Johnson, Curtis Harbert, and Connie Hess ran from the scene, law enforcement officers arrived. They found Trooper Bruce Smalls dead on the side of Interstate 95. They also found the RV. Inside the RV, under a mattress, they discovered the wrapped body of Dan Swanson. The police now knew that 2 men had been killed. The police began searching for the 3 people who had run away. Officers caught Curtis Harbert and Connie Hess first. Later, they caught Richard Johnson. All 3 were arrested and charged with murder. Richard was held in a jail cell pending his trial. In that jail, there was another inmate named Ronnie Dale Stevenson. Stevenson later claimed that Richard confessed to him. According to Stevenson, Richard said he did not remember shooting Trooper Smalls, but knew he did it. The first trial for the murder of Trooper Smalls happened in February 1986. The jury heard testimony from Curtis Harbert, Connie Hess, and Ronnie Stevenson. Harbert said Richard killed the trooper. Hess also said Richard did it. The jury found Richard guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death, but Richard appealed. In 1987, the South Carolina Supreme Court reversed the conviction. The court said the prosecutor had made improper arguments. Richard was granted a new trial. The second trial took place in March 1988. This time, Connie Hess did not come to court. She was in a mental institution in Nebraska. The prosecutor read her testimony from the first trial to the jury. Curtis Harbert testified again that Richard was the killer. Ronnie Stevenson also testified again. The jury found Richard guilty a second time. He was again sentenced to death. This time, the South Carolina Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence in 1991. Richard also faced charges for killing Dan Swanson. He agreed to plead guilty to that murder. In exchange, the state agreed not to seek the death penalty for Swanson's death. Richard received a life sentence for killing Swanson. Years passed. Richard remained on death row. His lawyers filed appeals in state and federal courts. In 1999, his execution was scheduled. But one day before the execution, something changed. Connie Hess, who was still living in Nebraska, signed a sworn statement. In that statement, she confessed that she was the one who shot Trooper Smalls, not Richard. She said she could not let an innocent man die. The South Carolina Supreme Court stopped the execution. They assigned a judge to decide if Hess was telling the truth. The judge found that Connie Hess was not credible. She had given many different stories over the years. Sometimes she said Richard did it. Sometimes she said Curtis did it. Now she said she did it. The judge ruled that her confession could not be believed. In June 2000, the South Carolina Supreme Court voted 3-2 to deny Richard a new trial. Two justices disagreed and said the confession created too much doubt. Richard's lawyers took the case to federal court. The federal courts refused to stop the execution. They said Richard had waived his right to appeal because he had made a statement apologizing to the jury. That statement was made after his conviction. Richard's lawyers argued that the statement was not a real confession, but the courts did not agree. On April 9, 2002, the South Carolina Supreme Court set May 3, 2002 as the execution date. Richard's lawyers asked Governor Jim Hodges for clemency. They presented the affidavit from Connie Hess. They also presented an affidavit from Trooper Small's mother, Thelma Blue. She said she did not want Richard to be executed. She said it would not bring her son back. Many religious leaders, former prosecutors, and retired judges also asked the governor to spare Richard's life. Governor Hodges denied clemency on May 2, 2002. He said he was convinced Richard was guilty. On May 3, 2002, the United States Supreme Court rejected 3 final appeals from Richard's lawyers. That same day, at 6 p.m., Richard Charles Johnson was taken to the Capital Punishment Facility in Columbia, South Carolina. He was strapped to a gurney. Lethal injection was used. He spoke his last words, "I love you. I'll see you later." He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. He was 39 years old. Curtis Harbert was never prosecuted for the killings. Connie Hess was never prosecuted. Both were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony against Richard. After Richard's execution, his mother Nelda Johnson said she believed her son was innocent. She said poor people do not get fair justice. Richard's body was taken by his family. The case was closed, but questions about who really killed Trooper Smalls remained unanswered for some people. The state of South Carolina carried out the execution, and Richard Charles Johnson became the 26th person executed in the state since 1976. Story 5. Reginald Leonard Reeves was born on April 21st, 1974. He was a black male. He grew up in Clarksville, Texas. Clarksville is a small town in the northeast part of the state. Reginald lived with his mother. His family was poor. The neighborhood was not easy for children. Many kids there did not have many chances to get ahead. Reginald's mother loved him, but she also saw that he had problems with his behavior. When Reginald was 11 years old, in July 1985, he did something very wrong. He attacked two younger boys. One boy was 7 years old. The other boy was 5 years old. Reginald forced these two boys to pull down their pants. When the boys did what he said, Reginald took a sharp stick and stuck it into their rectums. This caused pain and injury to both small children. Because of this attack, the juvenile authorities got involved. They did not send Reginald to a prison or a locked facility. Instead, they placed him on informal probation. This meant he had to follow rules and stay out of trouble. But the trouble did not stop. Over the next few years, Reginald's mother became more worried. She saw that her son was acting out often. She called the police and the juvenile authorities several times. She asked them to speak with Reginald about his unruly behavior. That means he was not listening to adults, he was angry, and he was causing problems at home. In November 1990, Reginald was 16 years old. That year, he assaulted his own mother. He hit her or hurt her physically. Then, shortly after that, he assaulted another person. These two attacks happened close together. Because of these assaults, the juvenile authorities placed Reginald on informal probation again. He was not sent to jail as an adult because he was still a minor. But the pattern was clear. Reginald had trouble controlling his anger, and he had hurt people more than once. Despite these incidents, Reginald was not in prison as an adult before he turned 19. He lived in Clarksville. He had friends. He listened to music. He was known in the neighborhood. But he also carried a record of hurting others. Those violent acts from his childhood and teenage years stayed in the files of the juvenile court. They would become important later, but at this point in his life, Reginald was still a young man living at home, with no adult convictions and no long-term lockup. That is where his early life ended. He was 19 years old. He lived in his apartment in Clarksville. He had friends and family nearby. He had a past with violence against children and his own mother. But he had never been charged with an adult crime. And then in September 1993, his life would change forever. On September 5th, 1993, a 14-year-old white female named Jenny Lynn Weeks was living in a group foster home in Paris, Texas. That evening, she ran away from the foster home with a 17-year-old girl named Sharon Forte. They walked to a nearby Walmart. There, they met Sharon's boyfriend, Raymond Jackson. Jackson drove both girls to his mother's house in Clarksville, Texas. At that time, Reginald Reeves was 19 years old. He lived in his own apartment in Clarksville. He was a friend and cousin of Raymond Jackson. Over the next day or two, Reginald came to Jackson's mother's house. There, he met Jenny Lynn Weeks for the first time. Reginald offered to let Jenny stay at his apartment. She agreed to go with him. So Jenny moved from Jackson's mother's house to Reginald's apartment. She lived there for a short time. During those days, Jenny wrote in her diary. On September 7th, 1993, she wrote that she was at another place, that she was kind of lonely but very happy, and that she was not afraid. On September 9th, 1993, she wrote that she was very happy, lonely for everyone back home, listening to oldies music, and that she would be in Dallas soon. The night of September 9th, 1993, started normally. At around 7 p.m., Raymond Jackson came to Reginald's apartment. He stayed for about 5 minutes. At that time, Reginald and Jenny were sitting at home, listening to music. Then Raymond left. Later, a friend of Reginald named Ralph Brown came over. Ralph Brown was 18 years old. The three people in the apartment were Reginald, Jenny, and Ralph. They started drinking beer. At around 9:30 p.m., Raymond Jackson came back to the apartment. This time, Sharon Forte came with him. They stayed for about 15 minutes. During that visit, Raymond took Reginald aside and asked him about the situation with Jenny. Reginald said there was no sexual relationship. He said Jenny was like a sister to him. He also said he planned to take her to Dallas so she could visit a boyfriend. Then Raymond and Sharon left at about 9:45 p.m. After that, something happened inside the apartment. The exact sequence of the attack was not witnessed, but the physical evidence later showed what was done. At some point, Reginald attacked Jenny. He forced sexual activity on her. The medical examiner later said the injuries showed the sex was forced, not consensual. He bit her body. He punched her. He put his hands around her neck and strangled her. Jenny tried to fight back. She had fingernail marks on her own neck from trying to free herself from the stranglehold. She also had broken or cracked fingernails on both hands. Those were defensive injuries. After Jenny was dead, Reginald did not leave her body in the apartment. He wrapped her body in a rug or carpet. Then he carried the rolled-up rug out of his apartment. A neighbor named Charlene Cathcart lived across the street from an abandoned and partially burned house. That evening, she saw two figures carrying what looked like a roll of carpet into that abandoned house. She called the police. The police arrived around midnight. They searched the abandoned house. In a hallway closet, they found the rolled-up rug. Inside the rug was the body of Jenny Lynn Weeks. She was 14 years old. The medical examiner later examined her body. He found bruises and abrasions on her face, neck, chest, knees, legs, ankles, buttocks, and back. He found the fingernail marks on her neck. He found broken fingernails on both hands. Her shorts and underwear were soaked with blood. Her t-shirt also had blood on it. Hairs were found on her right buttock, her pubic area, her leg, and her clothing. An internal exam showed multiple hemorrhages on her skull and neck. The neck injuries showed that a lot of pressure had been applied. The cause of death was strangulation. There was also alcohol in her system at a level of 0.05%, half the legal intoxication level for driving. That same night, shortly after midnight, Reginald approached a group of people near a school building about half a mile from his apartment. One of the people in the group was a 20-year-old woman named Stratress Carruthers. The group had been talking about a man who might have killed himself in a vacant house in the area. Reginald walked up and said he had not heard about that. Then, as the group was getting ready to leave, Reginald told Stratress Carruthers something strange. He said it was not an old man who had committed suicide. He said it was a girl. She asked how he knew. He said because he had done it. He said the victim was a 14-year-old girl. He said he had choked her, strangled her, and punched her. Stratress noticed that Reginald had a few scratches on his arms, but she did not believe him at the time. She thought he was lying or just drunk. She did not smell alcohol on him, and he did not seem drunk to her. The next evening, September 10th, 1993, Reginald Reeves went to the police. He was accompanied by his mother. He turned himself in. The other person who had been at the apartment that night, Ralph Brown, turned himself in the following day. After Reginald was in police custody, officers searched his apartment. They found that the apartment was neat and orderly. It looked like it had just been cleaned. In a laundry basket inside a closet, they found a pair of shorts, a bed sheet, and a pillowcase. They also found a gym bag in the closet. Inside the gym bag was a purse. Inside the purse was a diary and other items that had Jenny's name on them. Hairs were also collected from the bedroom floor, the bed sheet, and the pillowcase. The police then took saliva, blood, pubic hair, head hair, and teeth impressions from Reginald Reeves and also from Ralph Brown. The forensic experts compared those samples to the evidence found on Jenny's body and clothing. The head hair from Jenny's leg matched Reginald's hair. A pubic hair from her buttocks also matched Reginald's hair. None of the hairs matched Ralph Brown. The bite mark on Jenny's body was consistent with Reginald's teeth and not with Brown's teeth. Blood found on Jenny's t-shirt matched Reginald's blood type and again did not match Brown. At this point, the police had evidence that pointed clearly to Reginald Reeves. But the investigation was not yet complete. The arrest and the trial would come next. After Reginald Reeves turned himself in on September 10, 1993, the police already had his confession to Stracher's Carruthers and the physical evidence from his apartment and from Jenny's body. The police formally arrested him. Ralph Brown was also arrested the next day, but the forensic tests cleared him completely. No evidence linked Brown to the crime. He was released. The police continued to gather witness statements. Sharon Forte, the 17-year-old who ran away with Jenny, told police what she knew. Raymond Jackson also gave his account of the evening. Stracher's Carruthers told police exactly what Reginald had said to her near the school building after midnight. She confirmed that he admitted to choking, strangling, and punching a 14-year-old girl. The diary found in Reginald's apartment was shown to Jenny's best friend, Arlene Chilton, who was 16 at the time of the trial. Arlene identified the diary as one she had given to Jenny. She recognized Jenny's handwriting. The last entry was dated September 9, 1993, the day Jenny was killed. In that entry, Jenny wrote that she was very happy, lonely for everyone back home, listening to oldies music, and that she would be in Dallas soon. She never made it to Dallas. The case was set for trial. Because the crime happened in Red River County, the judge granted a change of venue on July 21, 1994. The trial was moved to Bowie County, Texas. The prosecutors believed that pretrial publicity in Red River County might make it hard for Reginald to get a fair trial. The trial began in front of a jury. The prosecutors presented the medical examiner's report, the hair and bite mark evidence, the blood evidence, the diary, and the testimony of Stracher's Carruthers. They also showed that Reginald had bragged to friends about beating and killing a 14-year-old girl. The defense argued that the evidence was not enough for a capital murder conviction, but the jury disagreed. On October 4, 1994, the jury found Reginald Leonard Reeves guilty of capital murder. Under Texas law at that time, a capital murder conviction meant the punishment was either life in prison or death. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. The jury answered 3 special questions required by Texas law for a death sentence. Based on their answers, the judge sentenced Reginald to death by lethal injection. The formal sentence was handed down on October 5, 1994. Reginald was 20 years old at the time of sentencing. After the sentence, Reginald's lawyers began appeals. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals automatically reviewed the conviction and death sentence. On October 23, 1996, the court upheld both. Reginald then filed a motion for rehearing, but it was refused as untimely on December 9, 1996. He did not file a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court at that time. Over the next several years, Reginald filed multiple habeas corpus petitions, legal requests to be released or have his sentence reduced. He filed a state habeas application on August 18, 1997. The state court denied it on February 18, 1998. He then filed a federal habeas petition on August 24, 1998, but he asked the court to dismiss it on October 2, 1998. He filed a second state habeas application, but the Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed it on February 3, 1999, calling it an abuse of the legal process. He filed a second federal habeas petition, and the district court denied it on November 16, 2000. He appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which upheld the denial on January 4, 2002. On April 4, 2002, Reginald filed a petition with the U.S. Supreme Court. On May 6, 2002, he filed a motion to stay his execution. The Supreme Court refused to review his case and denied the stay on May 8 or May 9, 2002. No last day appeals were filed. On May 9, 2002, Reginald Leonard Reeves was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas. He was 28 years old. His last meal was 4 pieces of fried chicken and 2 Cokes. Before the drugs were administered, he made a long final statement. He apologized repeatedly. He said, "I do apologize with all my heart and soul. I apologize for taking the life of your daughter, and I know how much pain you must be in. I want you to know I do love you. We're all one big family in humanity." The victim's mother, Sherry Delamar, was watching and nodded as he spoke. At 6:22 p.m., he was pronounced dead. After the execution, the victim's family chose not to speak to the media. Reginald's family had already forgiven him. Jenny Lynn Weeks remained dead at 14 years old, and the legal process had run its full course. That was the end of Reginald Leonard Reeves, who killed a child and was put to death by the state of Texas for that crime. Story 6. Linda Cheryl Lyon was born on February 8, 1948 in Orlando, Florida. Her father was a businessman named Frank Lyon. When Linda was still a young girl, her father died. Her mother later remarried. Linda grew up in Orlando with her family. She attended Edgewater High School in Orlando. She graduated in 1966. In school, she liked to read books more than watch television. She did not listen to rock music like most of her friends. Instead, she preferred the music of a composer named Ravel. After high school, Linda spent 1 year at Orlando Junior College. Then she found work as a hairdresser. She also lived for a time in Key West, Florida. In Key West, she volunteered at the local library. She became the president of the Friends of the Library group. She also volunteered for the Humane Society, which helps animals. She enjoyed sailing, scuba diving, and riding motorcycles across the country. She loved opera and read poetry. At some point, Linda got married. She had 1 son from that marriage. The marriage ended in divorce. In 1983, when she was 35 years old, she moved back to Orlando. There she married again. Her second husband was a man named Carl Block. He was twice her age. He was a retired military man and a securities broker. He had thick white hair and a deep tan. Carl Block had lost his only son in a car accident in 1974. He wanted another son very badly. In 1984, Linda gave birth to a son. They named him Gordon. Carl was very happy to have a son to carry on the family name. The marriage between Linda and Carl Block lasted for several years. But by 1992, the marriage was falling apart. Linda had become interested in politics. She joined the Libertarian Party of Florida. She attended political rallies and meetings. At one meeting in 1991, she met a man named George Sibley. He was a mechanic from Orlando. He was also interested in libertarian ideas. George was tall and slim with a gaunt face. Carl Block called him Ichabod Crane because of how he looked. Linda and George became friends. Then they became business partners. George invested money in a magazine that Linda wanted to publish. She called the magazine Liberatus. In the magazine, she wrote articles about the government. She believed that the federal government had become corrupt. She wrote that the 14th Amendment had been used to enslave Americans. She told her readers that they could declare themselves natural persons by giving up their driver's licenses and birth certificates. She and George did this themselves. They stopped using their driver's licenses. They revoked their birth certificates. They believed that this made them free from government control. By August 1993, Linda had separated from Carl Bloch. She and George Sibley were not just partners anymore. They had become lovers. They lived together as a common-law couple. Linda was in the process of divorcing Carl, but they fought over money and over their house. The arguments became very tense. One night in the summer of 1993, Linda and George went to Carl Bloch's apartment. They wanted to talk about money. During the conversation, Carl became angry. He lunged at Linda. Linda pulled out a small knife and held it up to warn him. George pulled Carl off of her. In the struggle, Carl received a shallow cut on his chest from the knife. The cut was only 1 inch long and not deep. Linda and George offered to take Carl to a medical center, but he refused. They bandaged the cut for him. Later that same night, Carl called the police. He told them that Linda and George had broken into his apartment and attacked him. The police arrested Linda and George at their home at 2:30 in the morning. Neither of them had ever been arrested before. They had only received traffic tickets in the past. They were taken to jail. They were charged with assault and battery. They both said it was self-defense. That is where Linda's life stood. She was out on bond. She and George were waiting for their court date. They believed they would be able to prove their innocence at trial. They did not know yet what was going to happen next. After Linda and George were arrested and charged with assault, they were released on bond. They had to wait for their sentencing hearing. The prosecutors offered them a plea deal. The deal was 6 years of probation. It was a first offense for both of them, but Linda and George refused to take the deal. They believed they had done nothing wrong. They thought the judge was against them. They thought the whole court system was corrupt. They fired their court-appointed lawyer. They wrote letters to the governor and other officials complaining about the judge. The sentencing hearing was set for September 7th, 1993. Linda and George did not show up. They decided to run away instead. A capias, which is a warrant for arrest, was issued for them. They were now fugitives. A friend in the sheriff's department told Linda that a SWAT team was planning to raid their home. The friend warned them to leave Florida. Linda believed the police wanted to kill them. So on September 10th, 1993, Linda, George, and Linda's 9-year-old son Gordon packed their red Ford Mustang hatchback. They loaded the car with pillows, bedding, and many weapons. They had 3 handguns, 2 semi-automatic rifles, and an M14 rifle. They also had large amounts of ammunition. Linda had a 9mm Glock pistol in her bag. George had his own gun. On the back of the car, Linda had placed a bumper sticker that said, "A woman raped is a woman without a gun." They drove north to Georgia. They stayed with friends there for 3 weeks, but they did not want to put their friends in danger. So they decided to go to Mobile, Alabama. They thought Mobile was a big port city where strangers would not be noticed. On October 4th, 1993, they left Georgia and drove toward Mobile. They stopped in Opelika, Alabama to wait for a friend to turn some silver coins into cash. They stayed in a motel there. On the morning of October 4th, 1993, they started driving again. Linda wanted to buy a vitamin supplement and make a phone call. She spotted a drugstore with a payphone in front. George pulled the car into the Pepperell Corners shopping center. Linda went to the payphone outside the drugstore. Her son Gordon got out of the car with her. They went into the store. When they came out, Gordon got back in the car. Linda went to the payphone again. George stood by the car waiting for her. A woman named Ramona Robertson was in the parking lot. She saw the red Mustang with pillows stacked on top of belongings. She saw the young boy inside the car. She thought the family was living out of their car. She was worried about the boy. She heard the boy ask for help. She watched as Linda finished her call, and the car moved to a different part of the parking lot, near the entrance to a Walmart store. Linda needed to make another call because her change had run out. She walked to a payphone in front of the Walmart. George parked the car and stayed inside with the boy. Ramona Robertson saw a police officer coming out of a store. That officer was Sergeant Roger Lamar Motley of the Opelika Police Department. He was 39 years old. He was not on regular patrol duty. He was the supply officer for the jail. He had just finished lunch with his wife and was shopping for supplies. Robertson went up to Motley and told him about the car with the little boy inside. She said she was worried about the child. She asked Motley to check on them. Motley agreed. Motley drove his police cruiser up and down the rows of parked cars. He found the red Mustang. He pulled up and stopped behind it. George Sibley was sitting in the Mustang with the boy. Linda was at the payphone with her back turned to the parking lot. Motley got out of his cruiser. He walked up to George. He asked George for his driver's license. George said he did not have one. He told Motley that he did not need one. George reached toward the car to get papers that he believed proved his legal exemption. Motley put his hand on his service revolver. He told George to put his hands on the car. George saw Motley reach for his gun. George then pulled out his own gun. Motley said a curse word. He turned and ran behind his police cruiser for cover. He was still holding his gun. George crouched by the bumper of the Mustang. Then the two men began firing at each other. People in the parking lot screamed. Some hid under their cars. Others ran back into the stores. Motley fired his weapon 3 times. One of his bullets hit George in the left forearm. The bullet went through his arm, but did not break any bones or major arteries. Linda was still on the payphone. She heard the popping sounds of gunfire. It took her a few seconds to understand what was happening. She turned around and saw Motley crouched behind his car, shooting at George. She dropped the phone. She pulled her 9mm Glock pistol from her bag. She ran toward the shooting. Motley did not see her coming because he was focused on George. Linda stopped and began firing at Motley from his side and rear. Motley turned and saw her. Linda later remembered that he looked very surprised. She kept firing. One of her bullets struck Motley in the chest. He staggered but did not fall. He reached into his police cruiser. Linda thought he was reaching for a shotgun, but he was actually grabbing the radio microphone. He said 00 into the radio. That was the code for help. Then he managed to put the cruiser into gear. The car moved forward, hit a parked car, and stopped. Motley passed out from his wounds. He was taken to a nearby hospital. He died there that afternoon. Linda ran back to the Mustang and got inside. George's arm was bleeding. Linda had a medical kit and knew how to treat the wound. She looked at the map to find a way out of Opelika. George drove fast through the streets, trying not to attract attention. But police were already looking for them. The couple picked up an unmarked police car following them. They drove over 100 miles per hour. They came to a crossroad and turned left. They drove about a quarter mile down a country road. Then they saw a police roadblock ahead. There were at least 20 police cars. George slowed down and pulled the car to the side of the road. He turned off the engine. Police officers and deputies surrounded the car with their guns drawn. They shouted for Linda and George to get out. Linda rolled down her window and put her hand out. She shouted that a child was in the car. The police then told her she could let the child go. Linda calmed her son Gordon. She opened the door and let him out. She kissed him and told him to be good. She pointed him toward a plainclothes policeman. Gordon walked away. Linda watched him go. Then the police shouted again for Linda and George to surrender. Linda told the police they would not surrender. She said the police would have to kill them first. For 4 hours, Linda and George sat in the car. They talked about what had happened. They discussed their future. They even talked about suicide. Police negotiators tried to convince them to give up. Linda printed messages on notebook paper, and George held them out the window. She asked to talk to her son, to the press, and to a religious leader. The negotiator agreed to these things if they surrendered first. Finally, the SWAT team surrounded the car. Police told Linda and George that if they did not surrender in 5 minutes, Tear gas would be fired into the car. Linda and George held their guns. They had planned to shoot themselves at the same time. But then George asked Linda if he could stay in the car and shoot himself while she surrendered, so she could still have a say in their son's future. Linda refused to leave him. She said they would surrender together or die together. George then decided they should surrender so they could fight the case. He wanted to prove their innocence for the sake of their son. They laid down their guns. They got out of the car with their hands up. Police arrested them. Linda and George were taken to the Lee County Jail in Opelika. They were charged with capital murder for the death of Officer Roger Motley. Linda's son Gordon was taken into custody and later sent back to Orlando to live with his grandmother. After Linda and George surrendered at the roadblock, police officers searched their red Ford Mustang. Inside the car, they found 3 handguns, 2 semi-automatic rifles, 1 M14 rifle, and many boxes of ammunition. They also found legal papers, books about constitutional law, and documents that Linda had written about revoking government identification. The police took photographs of everything in the car. They kept all the weapons as evidence. At the same time, other officers went back to the Walmart parking lot in Opelika. They talked to the people who had seen the shooting. Many witnesses gave statements. One woman named Ramona Robertson explained that she had asked Officer Motley to check on the car because she was worried about the little boy inside. Other witnesses described what they saw. They said George Sibley fired first. Then Motley fired back. Then Linda ran from the pay phone and started shooting at Motley from behind. Some witnesses said they saw Linda fire several rounds. The police collected bullet casings from the ground. They marked where each casing was found. The police also recovered the tape recording of Officer Motley's radio calls. The recording captured Motley saying he was checking on a vehicle. It also captured his last words, 00, which was the code for help. The tape was kept as evidence for the trial. Medical examiners performed an autopsy on Officer Roger Motley. They found that he had been shot multiple times. The bullet that went through his chest was the fatal wound. The bullet entered from the front at a slight downward angle. The medical examiners tried to find the bullet, but it was never recovered. They also tried to match the bullet fragments they did find to either George's gun or Linda's gun. The tests were not clear. The forensic experts could not say for certain who fired the bullet that killed Motley. This meant that under Alabama law, both Linda and George could be held equally responsible for the death. Linda and George were held in the Lee County Jail. They were kept in separate cells. They were not allowed to see each other. For the first several days, Linda was kept in a cold cell with no blanket. She later said the jailers mistreated her and George. Eventually, they were given basic supplies. Lawyers were appointed to represent them because they could not afford their own. Linda did not trust the lawyers. She believed the court system was corrupt. She fired her first court-appointed lawyer and then fired her second lawyer as well. She decided to represent herself at trial. The trial for Linda took place in 1994. The judge was named Harper. The prosecutor presented the evidence to the jury. He played the tape of Motley's radio call. He showed the guns found in the car. He called witnesses who had seen the shooting. The prosecutor argued that Linda had shot a police officer who was doing his job. He said it was capital murder. Linda acted as her own lawyer. She cross-examined witnesses. She filed legal papers challenging the court's authority. She argued that the state of Alabama never became a state again after the Civil War. She said the court had no jurisdiction over her. She also argued that she shot Motley in self-defense. She claimed that Motley had his hand on his gun and was about to shoot George. She wanted to show the jury Officer Motley's personnel file. She believed the file contained complaints about Motley being abusive to people. The judge refused to let the file be shown to the jury. The judge said there was no evidence that Motley had a bad record. Motley's personnel file had no complaints about misbehavior. His widow later said he He was a kind and patient man. The jury listened to all the evidence. They also heard Linda testify. She was calm on the witness stand. She explained why she fired her gun. Some people in the courtroom thought she showed no emotion or remorse. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict. They found Linda guilty of capital murder. After the guilty verdict, the same jury had to decide the punishment. The choice was either death by electrocution or life in prison without parole. Linda refused to ask the jury for mercy. She did not speak during the sentencing part of the trial. She told the court that she had already said everything she needed to say. The jury voted 10-2 in favor of the death penalty. The judge agreed with the jury. He sentenced Linda Lyon Block to death in the electric chair. George Sibley was tried separately. He was also found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. He was sent to death row at Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama. Linda was sent to the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. After her conviction, Linda had the right to file appeals. An appeal is a request for a higher court to review the case. Most death row inmates file many appeals to try to save their lives. Linda refused to cooperate with any lawyer. The court appointed a lawyer named W. David Nichols to handle her appeal. Linda would not talk to him. She said she did not recognize the authority of Alabama's courts. She wrote letters to Congress and to other officials claiming there was a conspiracy against her. She said she would rather die than accept a corrupt legal system. Because she refused to file appeals, her case moved quickly toward execution. The Alabama Supreme Court reviewed her conviction and sentence. They upheld the death penalty in 1999. No higher court stopped the execution. Linda had no active appeals left. On April 19, 2002, an execution date was set. But the Alabama Supreme Court moved the date to May 10, 2002. Some people believe the date was changed because April 19th was a date connected to the Waco fire and the Oklahoma City bombing, which were important to people like Linda. On May 10, 2002, just after midnight, Linda Lyon Block was taken to the execution chamber at Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama. Her head had been shaved so electrodes could be attached to her skin. She wore a white prison outfit. A black hood was placed over her face. She was strapped into the electric chair, which was painted yellow and known as Yellow Mama. The warden asked if she wanted to make a final statement. She declined. She did not say any last words. At 12:01 a.m., electricity was sent through her body. The first jolt was 2,500 volts for 20 seconds. The second jolt was 250 volts for 100 seconds. At 12:10 a.m., she was pronounced dead. She was the first woman executed in Alabama since 1957. She was the 9th woman executed in the United States since the death penalty was brought back in 1976. Officer Roger Motley's widow, Juanita Motley, went to the prison to witness the execution. She entered the witness room and saw Linda. But when the prison staff pulled the blind and put the hood over Linda's face, Juanita asked to be taken out. She said she could not watch any further. After the execution, she told reporters that she felt no closure. She said her heart went out to Linda's family and friends. She wished them peace and strength. Linda's son Gordon had been sent back to Orlando to live with his grandmother. He grew up and became a good student. He wanted to study automotive engineering in college. George Sibley remained on death row. His execution date was never set. Linda's body was taken from the prison. The case was closed. That night, the electric chair known as Yellow Mama was used for the last time because Alabama changed its execution method to lethal injection a few weeks later.